Carmel CAP has been thinking and writing and bringing together folks quite a bit lately around the issue of elevating and aligning the teaching profession. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, thanks, Marla. And thanks to the Schenker Institute for putting this session together and inviting me to participate in it. I guess I did actually want to pull the lens of the camera back a little bit and talk a little bit about the context for the regulation and even the conversation about teacher preparation. Because at CAP, when we're thinking through these issues, we're really trying to think about the profession as a whole. And I think something that we need to keep in mind is when the statutory provision that the regulation relates to was passed, which was in 1998, roughly 20 years ago, if we think about what's happened in the education policy context and systems since over those intervening 2 decades, I think it's pretty easy to see that that we've had some very dramatic changes in the education sector, and that we have raised the bar in terms of expectations for teachers in pretty radical ways. And some of the things that I would point to is if you just look at demographic shifts in our schools are much more diverse, which is a very positive thing, but we have a much higher percentage of low-income students in the public system than we did 20 years ago, which creates challenges for teachers. Higher concentrations of poverty just makes their job harder. There's just no way to argue with that fact. We've seen an increase in the number of English language learners, which also creates challenges for students and teachers. We've rightly demanded that students with disabilities be held to high standards and be taught in the least restrictive environment. We've rightly embraced the idea that all children can learn, all children can reach high standards. And then more recently, we've said, and the standards to which we need to teach them must be fairly radically higher because our students need them to be higher in order to succeed in a global economy. All of these changes, many of these changes are positive changes, but it means that we're asking a lot more of our nation's teachers. So in order for them to be able to do what we're asking them to do, we also need to radically change the systems of support that we have in place for those teachers. And that's the focus of the Teach Strong campaign, which we participate in with the AFT and with Sharon and Ben. But in that context, I think we have to also keep in mind that 20 years ago, when this statutory provision was passed, what Congress saw before it was that we had a system of teacher preparation that had insufficient on-the-job training, insufficient focus on subject matter expertise, insufficient focus on the science of learning, lack of attention to reading instruction, low standard for entry, low standard for completion, low standard for entry into the profession, and virtually no connection between the preparation programs and the K-12 system. So I think in that context, Congress was right to say states need to own ensuring quality in these programs. The federal government provides $150 billion just in student aid to the post-secondary sector. If you look at all government funding for the post-secondary sector, about 2/3 of it comes from the federal government and 1/3 from the state. So I think it's very appropriate for the federal government to say, we're making a big investment in this sector, the post-secondary sector. We also make a big investment in the K-12 sector, but the post-secondary sector isn't going to be successful if the K-12 sector is not successful. So they need to work together and create a collaboration, and that's what the statute asks them to do. And I think that was the right thing for Congress to do. In the intervening 20 years from passage of that statutory provision till the time Barack Obama became president, the states didn't take up that challenge. Very few we have thousands of 25,000 programs, and only a handful were identified to be closed down. 34 states had never identified a single program for quality reasons. Until recently, the chief's review of the programs were virtually a rubber stamp. And very few states require, most states require somewhere between 10 and 15 weeks of clinical training in a context where our competitors across the world, or Germany, requires 2 years of clinical training. So I think when the president came into office, he had very strong reason to believe that the statutory provision was not working as it needed to work. More importantly, our teachers needed more. Teachers overwhelmingly said that they did not feel adequately prepared by the programs that they were graduating from. I think we do. That's not to say that there aren't programs that are of high quality. There are definitely programs of high quality. I was proud to be an advocate for the Teacher Quality Partnership Program that was also in the Higher Education Act that helped seed innovation in the space. But the reality was that program was doing that. It was seeding innovation, but it wasn't scaling those innovations on a systemic basis. I think we still see in many places the bar for entry is too low, the bar from exit is too low. There continues to be an insufficient attention to the science of learning, an insufficient connection between the latest research around learning and the schools of preparation, and I think you're going to address that issue, which I'm very excited to hear about. I think there continues to be a lack of a systemic effort to incorporate these new higher standards that our K-12 teachers are expected to teach to into the curriculum of the post-secondary programs. And we still have insufficient call for on-the-job training in most programs. Only 18 states require courses in reading instruction. Only 17 states assess whether the prospective teachers have acquired the skills they need to teach reading. And our kids can't be successful if they don't learn to read. So we need to systemically tackle that issue. I would say, obviously in a very biased way, that in some measure due to programs like Race to the Top and ESEA Flexibility Initiative, we do see more and more states aggressively tackling these issues. I think some of those states would have tackled them without any federal program. I would point to states like Delaware, Massachusetts, New York, where they are really thinking through how they can improve not just teacher preparation, but improve the way they recruit prospective teachers into those programs, how they help teachers through induction and residency programs once they graduate. So I definitely recognize those efforts and applaud them, but I just believe that our students and our teachers can't afford to wait for that to happen organically. There does need to be a system-wide effort to improve the quality of our teacher preparation programs. So I think in that context, I would agree that the regulation as proposed was not perfect. They're actively reviewing it. I think we're going to see changes to it based on the input from the field, but I do believe that it's appropriate to move forward with the regulation. And I think the areas of focus in the regulation are good ones. I guess I would also argue that it is not a blame and shame framework that they've laid out. It gives a great deal of flexibility to states to craft the system as they see fit. It does ask them to identify high-performing programs, good programs, struggling programs, low-performing programs, and take action to improve the ones that are low-performing. But it gives every state a lot of flexibility in terms of formulating which programs fall in which category. So I think unlike NCLB and AYP, it isn't this federally determined formula and you're either a good school or a bad school. So I think it was much more sophisticated and well thought out than that, and I think we should acknowledge that. I'm happy to talk as the conversation proceeds about the specifics of the regulation, but I think what's more important is to hopefully be able to come to some consensus that it is an issue that needs to be tackled. It's an issue that deserves urgency in our response, and I guess I personally think that we should pull every lever of government we have to push the sector in the right direction. And I think that includes holding up the people who are doing the right thing and allowing them to be an example for others.